Good morning, just Patrick here, coming to you again from Complete Health. And I was reading a colleague of mine's book. So I've got a friend, he's a chiropractor, he works in Haywards Heath. And I've been reading his book probably for the last 2 or 3 days. But yesterday I read a chapter where he started to question some of the methods of the medical model. Now, not necessarily in a anti or a pro way for either end of the spectrum. So he's not anti-vaccination, he's not pro-vaccination. He just believes in opening the argument for debate as to what was the most effective so that we can further look into the means and methods that were actually going to best serve our communities. So it was interesting because he was talking about the history of vaccinations, how vaccinations were developed, some of the complications that were surrounding vaccinations, some of the things that vaccinations have helped with, but also some of the detriments that vaccinations have also produced. Now, a lot of us don't know necessarily the history, but vaccines in the initial sense, what was happening is you would take infected animals and you would pull the pus from infected animals and you would use those antibodies and inject those into humans to try and initiate an immune response. And what actually ended up happening is, ironically, more people that were being vaccinated initially were being killed than actually benefited. But surrounding vaccines nowadays, there are still some questionable debates as to whether there are pros and cons to vaccines. Now, interestingly enough, and especially in the current climate, because this is something that many of us will be looking to as a solution to what's going on with the current climate. Now, interestingly enough, what many scientists had noticed in the past is that if you want to get a herd immunity, you need to get somewhere between 60 and 80% of the population to be immune to the disease. Whereas with vaccines, they found that actually, yes, you can build herd immunity, but the difference is that statistically you have to have a much higher rate of immunity for this same situation to occur. So it needs to be somewhere between 95 and 100%. So yes, okay, you can instill all of these antibodies into people's bodies and you can instill these changes. However, are they necessarily benefiting us in the same way? So interestingly enough, what they actually found is with measles, smallpox, Ebola, and many of these other very serious conditions and diseases that were affecting hundreds and thousands of people and were killing hundreds of thousands of people were actually better managed by proper lifestyle, proper diet, changes in, and the main one, especially with stuff like Ebola, was the fact that they were consuming rancid meats, which were actually infected, and that was actually infecting the host. By changing the sanitary environment and cleaning up the environment, which funny enough is what a lot of us are now doing post-COVID. So we're actually taking extra precautions to keep areas and spaces clean. And if you address the main causes of the spread, then all of a sudden then we manage to control the disease. And there's I believe it was called the Leicester technique, is basically what we were performing before we decided to do lockdown, which is if you develop symptoms, remove yourself from the environment and only isolate yourself surrounding people in small numbers to control the spread of the disease. You can't stop, but to control the spread of disease. So we need to just be a little bit more mindful, maybe challenge some of the thoughts, challenge some of the opinions, and not to just take everything as gospel, because actually measles, smallpox, cholera, all of these diseases actually started to reduce as sanitary conditions came in, not necessarily as the vaccines came in. Did the vaccines help? Well, unfortunately, we don't 100% know because there were too many confounding variables, which is why we should always question the usage of these things and actually put all the facts and figures in front of people so people can make themselves an informed decision. And that's the most important thing, is it's informed. So there's no bias one way or the other. You are making the decision based on all the facts that you can see, rather than being peer pressured into a certain choice or model, which sometimes our medical profession, and not just our medical profession, but other professionals as well, will belittle you or make you feel smaller for making a decision that they do not feel is. We like to empower our patients and try and encourage them to make decisions that will better themselves, but will not belittle people when they make decisions that maybe go against their health. So guys, if you want to learn a little bit more about ways you can be proactive, or maybe you want to know a little bit more about how you can get this book, it's not currently released yet. So what I'll do is, when David does eventually release his book, so this is my colleague who runs his clinic in Haywards Heath, when he does eventually release his book, we'll probably end up doing a podcast with him, and we'll probably end up doing a couple of conversations with him in the meantime on how he's come to develop his book, but we'll also make sure that we give you access to how you can get hold of that as well. Until tomorrow, guys, speak to you soon.